Welcome to HOA Spot. She used parking enforcement like a personal grudge. I will make sure management sees this, Teresa yelled, jabbing her finger at my windshield while the tow truck idled behind her with its amber lights cutting through the afternoon glare. She had her phone out, already typing into the neighborhood group chat, announcing that the tow was happening because she had already promised my parking spot to someone else. I stood there with my lanyard swinging from my belt loop, keys jangling, watching her wave a handheld plate scanner like it was a weapon. The wind whipped a stack of loose papers across the asphalt and rattled the tow chain hanging off the truck bed, and I could see two neighbors by the mailbox cluster whispering and pointing at the chalk marks someone had drawn by my tires. I work as a fleet mechanic for a municipal garage in Fishers, Indiana, which means I know vehicles and I know towing procedures, and I knew right then that this was not legitimate. My guest permit was taped to the inside of my windshield, clearly visible, with the date printed in block letters that nobody could miss. But Teresa Smith, Finance Committee lead for the Landing at Harborview Property Owners Association, did not care about facts. She cared about control, and she had decided my car was the problem of the day. "I do not negotiate with violations," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She turned the flashlight on even though it was broad daylight, shining it at my license plate like she was conducting a forensic investigation. "Your paperwork is cute. Mine has a letterhead," she added, pulling a folded sheet from her purple windbreaker pocket and waving it in my face without letting me read it. The tow driver climbed out of the cab, a young guy in a Stain Company shirt, and he looked between us like he was trying to figure out who was actually in charge. Teresa immediately stepped toward him, blocking my view, and started talking fast about emergency access and fire lanes, which was complete fiction because I was parked in a standard guest spot 20 feet from the curb. I could hear her saying something about a board resolution and authorized vendor agreements, and the driver nodded slowly, glancing at his clipboard. I pulled out my phone and opened my email, scrolling back to the permit approval I had received 3 weeks ago. The timestamp was clear, the expiration date was 2 months away, and the HOA management company had sent me a confirmation PDF with their logo and everything. I stepped forward and held the screen up. "This permit is valid until March," I said, keeping my voice calm even though my pulse was hammering. "You can see the date right here." Teresa barely glanced at it. She tapped her scanner against her palm like a judge with a gavel. "That system is outdated," she said. "We switched vendors last month and all old permits are void. You should have received the notice." "I never received any notice," I said. "Check your spam folder," she shot back, and then she turned to the driver again. "Hook it up. This vehicle is in violation of the updated parking policy, and the owner has been notified multiple times." That was a lie, and I knew it. But the driver was already moving toward my car with the wheel lift controls in his hand. I felt the situation tipping, that sickening lurch when you realize someone is about to do something irreversible and you have about 10 seconds to stop it. I stepped between him and my front bumper, hands up, not aggressive but firm. "I need to see the authorization paperwork before you touch this car," I said. "If there is no valid violation, this is an illegal tow, and you are liable." The driver hesitated. Teresa did not. She shoved her folded paper at him, and he took it, squinting at the text. I could not see what it said, but whatever it was, it looked official enough to satisfy him. He glanced at me, shrugged, and said, "Lady says it is authorized. I got to follow the contract." I pulled out my own phone and started recording. The driver saw the camera and stopped. Teresa saw it too, and her face went red. "You are harassing a vendor," she snapped. "That is another violation." "I am documenting an illegal tow," I said. If this truck touches my car without proper authorization, I am calling the police and filing a complaint with the state towing board. I will also be filing a complaint with the management company and requesting a formal hearing." Teresa stepped closer, close enough that I could see the veins standing out on her neck. She was furious, but she was also trapped, because the driver was now looking uncertain and the two neighbors by the mailboxes had their phones out too. She clicked her flashlight off and jammed it into her pocket. "Fine," she said, voice dripping with venom, "but this is not over. I am filing a formal complaint with the board tonight, and you will be hearing from our attorney. Your refusal to comply with updated parking enforcement is going to cost you a lot more than a tow fee." She turned on her heel and marched back toward the clubhouse, her bucket hat wobbling in the wind. The driver looked at me, looked at his clipboard, and then looked at the tow truck. "I am going to need to call my supervisor," he said. "This is getting weird." I appreciated that, I told him. "Take your time." He walked back to the truck and got on his radio. I stood there with my phone still recording, watching Teresa disappear around the corner of the clubhouse building. My hands were shaking, adrenaline burning through my system, and I knew this was just the beginning. Teresa did not make empty threats. She had a history in this neighborhood, a reputation for targeting people who crossed her, and I had just crossed her in front of witnesses. The community I live in is one of those places where certain homes get special treatment, and everyone knows it. The landing at Harborview is technically a property owners association, not a traditional HOA, but the rules are just as aggressive, and the enforcement is just as selective. Teresa sits on the finance committee, which means she has access to every budget line, every vendor contract, and every resident complaint. She uses that access like a weapon, and she had been gunning for me ever since I questioned a mysterious line item in the quarterly report 3 months ago. That line item was a $5,000 payment to a towing company called Rapid Response Tow and Recovery, listed under Community Safety Services. When I asked about it at the annual meeting, Teresa had shut me down fast, saying it was part of a new parking enforcement initiative and that all the details were in the updated rules. I asked where I could find those updated rules, and she told me they were posted on the resident portal. I checked the portal that night and found nothing. I emailed the management company and got a generic response saying they would look into it. 2 weeks later, I got a letter in the mail, a red stamped final notice envelope with no explanation inside, just a photocopy of a rule about guest parking limits and a handwritten note saying I was in violation. I ignored the letter because I was not in violation. I did not have guests parked overnight, I did not have abandoned vehicles, and my own car had a valid resident decal. But Teresa did not forget, and she did not let it go. Over the next month, I started seeing her around the neighborhood more often, always with that handheld plate scanner, always shining her flashlight at windshields and taking notes on a clipboard. She started showing up at the same times I came home from work, lurking near the guest parking area, watching. Then the email blasts started. The first one went out to the entire neighborhood, a mass message with the subject line "Parking Compliance Reminder," and a long list of rules, most of which I had never seen before. It included a new policy requiring all guest permits to be renewed every 30 days, a ban on street parking after 10 p.m., and a warning that any vehicle without a current decal would be towed immediately. The email was signed by Teresa on behalf of the board, and it included a link to a PDF of the updated rules. I downloaded the PDF and found a 50-page document with no table of contents, no index, and no way to search for specific sections. Buried on page 37 was a clause saying that all permits issued before January 1st were void and needed to be reissued through the new vendor portal. I did not have access to the new vendor portal because nobody had told me it existed. I emailed the management company again, and this time I got a response saying that portal access required a one-time registration fee of $75 and that I would need to submit a copy of my ID, proof of residency, and a signed waiver acknowledging the new parking rules. I paid the fee, submitted the documents, and waited. A week later, I got an email saying my registration was denied because my documents did not match the format requirements, and I would need to resubmit with notarized copies. The email also said there was a resubmission fee of $50. I called the management company and got a voicemail. I called again the next day and got the same voicemail. I sent another email and got an auto reply saying the office was closed for staff training and would reopen in 5 business days. By the time I finally got through to a real person, it was too late. My old permit had expired, my new permit was stuck in bureaucratic limbo, and Teresa had already added me to her target list. The tow truck incident was just the opening shot. 2 days later, I came home from work and found a bright orange sticker on my windshield, a violation notice with bold letters saying final warning, and a threat of immediate towing if I did not comply within 24 hours. The notice claimed my vehicle was parked in a fire lane, which was absurd because I was parked in the same guest spot I always used, the one with clear pavement markings and no red curb. I peeled the sticker off, took photos of the parking space and the surrounding area, and sent them to the management company with a formal complaint. The response I got was a copy-paste job, a generic paragraph saying that all parking violations were reviewed by the board and that I could request a hearing if I disagreed with the citation. The email also said that hearing requests had to be submitted in writing with a $50 filing fee and that the next available hearing date was 6 weeks away. I did not have 6 weeks. The notice said I had 24 hours, which meant Teresa was setting me up for another tow attempt, and this time she would probably succeed because I would not be home to stop it. I needed help, and I knew exactly who to call. My cousin is married to a local attorney named David Chen, a guy who specializes in real estate disputes and HOA litigation. I had met him a few times at family events, and he had always told me that if I ever had trouble with the HOA, I should reach out before things got out of hand. I called him that night and explained the situation, and he listened without interrupting, which I appreciated because I was talking fast and probably not making a lot of sense. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "They are setting you up for a fee bleed. This is a classic vendor kickback scheme. They partner with a towing company, create impossible rules, and then split the revenue from bogus tows and citations. If you fight it, they bury you in paperwork and fees until you either pay up or move out." "What do?" I asked. "Document everything," he said. "Every email, every notice, every interaction. Get witnesses if you can. And do not pay any of the fees until we know what we are dealing with. I am going to send you a records request template. File it with the management company and the board, and request copies of the parking enforcement contract, the vendor agreement, and the board meeting minutes where these new rules were approved. If they refuse or delay, that is evidence of bad faith." "What if they tow me anyway?" I asked. "Then we sue," he said, "but let us try to avoid that. In the meantime, park somewhere else if you can. Do not give them an easy target." I did not have somewhere else to park. The guest spots were the only option unless I wanted to park on the street, which was now banned after 10 p.m. thanks to Teresa's new rules. I thought about parking in front of a friend's place outside the neighborhood, but that would mean a 20-minute walk every time I needed my car, and with my work schedule, that was not realistic. I was stuck, and Teresa knew it. The next morning, I filed the records request. I used David's template, which was polite but firm, and I sent it to both the management company and the board president via email and certified mail. I also sent a copy to Teresa directly, just to make sure she knew I was not backing down. I waited for a response, expecting delays and excuses, but what I got was worse. 3 days after I filed the request, I got a knock on my door. I opened it and found a guy in a polo shirt with a badge clipped to his belt holding a clipboard and a camera. He introduced himself as a compliance officer for the HOA and said he was there to conduct a routine inspection of my property. I asked to see his credentials, and he showed me a laminated card with the HOA logo and his photo. I asked what the inspection was for, and he said it was part of a new quarterly audit program and that all residents were being inspected on a rotating schedule. I did not believe him, but I also did not want to escalate things by refusing, so I let him in. He walked through my townhouse slowly, taking photos of everything: my kitchen counters, my living room furniture, the small patio off the back door. He made notes on his clipboard, muttering to himself, and then he handed me a printed checklist with a dozen items circled in red. The list included things like unapproved exterior paint color, trash bins visible from street, and decorative items on patio in violation of aesthetic guidelines. None of it was true. My townhouse was the same beige color it had been when I moved in. My trash bins were stored behind a privacy fence, and the only thing on my patio was a folding chair and a small potted plant. I pointed this out, and the compliance officer shrugged. "These are preliminary findings," he said. "You will receive a formal notice in the mail with instructions on how to remediate the violations. If you do not comply within the specified time frame, you will be subject to fines and possible legal action." He left before I could argue, and I stood there holding the checklist, feeling like I had just been mugged in my own home. I called David and told him what happened, and he sighed. "They are harassing you," he said. "This is retaliation for the records request. Do not fix anything on that list. Let them send the formal notice, and then we will respond with a harassment complaint. In the meantime, keep documenting." If you are enjoying this absolute chaos, hit that like button and subscribe for more HOA nightmare stories. The formal notice arrived 2 days later, another red-stamped final notice envelope, this time with a 3-page letter listing all the alleged violations and a demand for immediate compliance. The letter also included a clause saying that if I wanted to dispute the findings, I would need to submit a written appeal with a $100 filing fee and wait for the next compliance review, which was scheduled for 8 weeks out. The letter was signed by Teresa on behalf of the Compliance Committee, and it included a footnote saying that failure to comply would result in daily fines of $50 per violation, starting in 7 days. I did the math. If they enforced the fines, I would be looking at $600 a week, which would add up to over $3,000 by the time the compliance review happened. It was extortion, plain and simple, and it was designed to force me into either paying the bogus fees or selling my place and leaving. I was not going to do either. David filed a formal harassment complaint with the management company and sent a letter to the board demanding an immediate halt to all enforcement actions against me. The letter cited Indiana HOA law, which requires boards to follow fair procedures and prohibits retaliation against residents who exercise their rights. It also pointed out that the compliance inspection was conducted without proper notice, and that the alleged violations were fabricated. David attached copies of the photos I had taken, showing that my property was in full compliance with the actual rules, and he requested a full refund of any fees I had paid, plus a written apology. The response came fast, but it was not what I expected. Instead of backing down, the board doubled down. I got an email from the management company saying that my records request was being denied because it was overly broad and would require unreasonable resources to fulfill. The email said that if I wanted specific documents, I would need to submit a revised request with a detailed list of exactly what I was looking for, along with a processing fee of $200 per document. The email also said that the harassment complaint had been reviewed and found to be without merit, and that the compliance findings were valid and enforceable. David read the email and laughed, but it was not a happy laugh. "They are daring you to sue," he said. "They think you will give up because litigation is expensive and slow. But here is the thing, they just made a huge mistake. By denying the records request, they opened themselves up to a state transparency complaint, and by continuing the enforcement after receiving a harassment complaint, they created a paper trail that proves bad faith. We can use this." "What do we do next?" I asked. "We file a complaint with the Indiana Attorney General's office," he said, "and we also send a demand letter to the towing company because I guarantee they do not want to be dragged into a fraud investigation. If we can get the tow company to back out of the contract, the whole enforcement scheme collapses." I liked the sound of that, but I also knew it was going to take time, and time was the one thing I did not have. Teresa was escalating fast, and I could feel the pressure building. I started seeing her everywhere, at the mailbox cluster when I checked my mail, at the clubhouse when I went to the gym, even at the neighborhood coffee shop on Saturday mornings. She never said anything, just watched me with that smug look on her face, like she was counting down the days until she could have my car towed and my townhouse fined into oblivion. Then the group chat incident happened. I do not know who added me to the neighborhood group chat, but one morning I woke up to 57 unread messages, all of them about parking enforcement. Teresa had posted a long rant about problem residents who refused to follow the rules and how the board was taking aggressive action to restore order. She did not mention me by name, but she posted a photo of my car with the license plate blurred out, and she wrote, "This vehicle has been cited multiple times and the owner continues to ignore compliance notices. If you see this car parked in guest spaces, please report it immediately." The responses were brutal. People I had never met were calling me a scofflaw and demanding that the board take stronger action. A few people defended me, pointing out that the rules were confusing and the enforcement seemed selective, but they were drowned out by the pile-on. Teresa responded to every supportive comment with some version of "I do not negotiate with violations," and accused anyone who questioned her of enabling bad behavior. I screenshot the entire thread and sent it to David. He called me 10 minutes later. "This is gold," he said. "She just admitted in writing that she is targeting you specifically, and she is using the group chat to incite harassment. We can add this to the complaint and argue that she is creating a hostile environment. But here is the thing. I think she is about to make an even bigger mistake." "What do you mean?" I asked. "She is too confident," he said. "People like her always overreach, and when they do, they leave evidence. Just keep your head down and let her think she is winning." I waited for the right audience, because the reveal needed witnesses, and I think we are about to get that audience. He was right. A week later, I got a notice in the mail saying that the board was holding an emergency meeting to discuss ongoing parking violations and enforcement challenges. The notice said that the meeting was open to all residents and that public comment would be allowed. It also said that the board would be voting on a proposal to authorize additional towing actions and increase fines for non-compliance. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday at 7 p.m. in the clubhouse. I knew this was Teresa's play. She was going to use the meeting to publicly shame me, push through her enforcement agenda, and make it look like the board had community support. I also knew this was my chance to turn the tables, because if I could present my evidence in front of witnesses, Teresa would not be able to bury it. David agreed to come with me, and we spent the next few days preparing. He subpoenaed the towing company's records through a pre-litigation discovery request, and we got a partial response that included invoices, service logs, and a contract summary. The documents were a mess, full of redactions and missing pages, but there was enough there to see the pattern. Rapid Response Tow and Recovery had been paid over $20,000 in the past 6 months, with most of the charges coming from parking enforcement services and boot removal fees. The invoices were vague, with no breakdown of individual tows or citations, and the contract included a clause given the HOA a percentage of all revenue generated from enforcement actions. That was the smoking gun. The HOA was not just enforcing parking rules, they were profiting from them, and Teresa was the one signing off on the payments. David also found emails between Teresa and the towing company owner discussing target properties and high-value enforcement opportunities. One email included a list of addresses, and mine was on it, circled in red. We printed everything, made copies, and put together a presentation packet. David also drafted a formal complaint to file with the State Attorney General's office, alleging fraud, kickback schemes, and abuse of HOA authority. We were ready. The night of the meeting, I showed up early. The clubhouse was already packed, with residents filling the folding chairs and spilling into the standing room area along the back wall. Teresa was at the front table with the rest of the board, looking calm and composed, her purple windbreaker draped over the back of her chair and her flashlight sitting on the table like a prop. She saw me come in and her eyes narrowed, but she did not say anything. David came in a few minutes later, carrying a briefcase and a folder. He sat next to me and set the folder on the table in front of us. People were staring, whispering, and I could feel the tension building. Teresa called the meeting to order, reading through the agenda in a flat, bureaucratic voice. She started with a recap of recent parking violations, throwing out statistics about the number of citations issued and the amount of fines collected. She made it sound like a public safety crisis, like the neighborhood was on the verge of collapse because of reckless drivers and non-compliant residents. Then she got to me. She did not use my name, but she did not have to. She pulled up a slide on the projector screen, a photo of my car with the guest permit visible in the windshield, and she said, "This vehicle has been cited 6 times in the past 2 months for repeated violations of parking policy. The owner has refused to comply with remediation notices and has filed frivolous complaints in an attempt to delay enforcement. Tonight, we are asking the board to authorize immediate towing and to impose escalated fines to deter this kind of behavior." She sat down, looking satisfied, and the board president asked if there were any questions. I raised my hand. Teresa stared at me, and for a second I thought she was going to ignore me, but the board president nodded and said I could speak. I stood up, and David handed me the folder. I walked to the front of the room, feeling every pair of eyes on me, and I set the folder on the table. I opened it and pulled out the first document, the invoice summary from Rapid Response Tow and Recovery. I held it up so everyone could see. "This is an invoice from the towing company that the HOA has been using for parking enforcement," I said. "Over the past 6 months, the HOA has paid this company over $20,000. Most of that money came from citations and towing fees charged to residents like me. What the board has not told you is that the HOA is getting a percentage of those fees as part of the contract. That is a kickback scheme, and it is illegal. The room erupted. People were shouting questions, demanding to see the documents, and Teresa was on her feet, her face bright red. "That is a confidential contract," she yelled. "You have no right to share that information." David stood up. "It is public record," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Your client filed a pre-litigation discovery request and the towing company complied. These documents are now part of an ongoing fraud investigation, and they will be submitted to the Indiana Attorney General's office tomorrow morning." Teresa looked like she had been slapped. The board president was flipping through his own copy of the agenda, looking panicked, and the other board members were whispering to each other. I pulled out the next document, the email thread between Teresa and the towing company owner. I handed copies to my ally first, then we presented together so Karen could not isolate me. David took half the stack and started passing them to the people in the front row, and I took the other half and handed them to the people standing along the back wall. "This is an email from Teresa Smith to the owner of Rapid Response Tow and Recovery," I said. "In it, she discusses targeting specific properties for enforcement and refers to my address as a high-value opportunity. She also mentions coordinating with the compliance officer to manufacture violations and maximize revenue. This is not about safety or rule enforcement. This is about using HOA authority to extort residents." Teresa tried to interrupt, but David cut her off. "We also have evidence that Miss Smith filed false reports with the towing company, claiming that my client's vehicle was blocking emergency access when it was not. Those false reports are documented in the towing company's service logs, and they are supported by dashcam footage that shows Miss Smith moving traffic cones to create the appearance of a fire lane violation." That got everyone's attention. The dashcam footage was the twist I had been waiting to reveal, the piece of evidence that made everything else click into place. The tow truck driver had mentioned it offhand during a follow-up call with David, saying that his company required drivers to record every job for liability reasons. David subpoenaed the footage, and when we watched it, we saw exactly what we needed. The video showed Teresa walking out to the guest parking area with a stack of orange cones, placing them along the curb near my car, and then taking photos with her phone to make it look like I had parked in a restricted zone. David queued up the video on his laptop and connected it to the projector. The room went silent as everyone watched Teresa on screen, moving the cones, adjusting her flashlight, and then stepping back to take the photos. When the video ended, the silence stretched out, heavy and uncomfortable, until someone in the back row said, "That is fraud." Teresa did not say anything. She just sat there, staring at the table, her hands clenched into fists. The board president cleared his throat and said, "We will need to recess and consult with our attorney before proceeding with this meeting." David shook his head. "No recess," he said. "You are going to vote right now on whether to continue the enforcement actions against my client, and you are going to vote no. If you do not, I will file the fraud complaint tonight, and I will also file a civil suit on behalf of my client and any other residents who have been targeted by this scheme. You will lose, and it will cost you a lot more than $20,000. The board president looked at Teresa, then at the other board members, and then at the crowd. He nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "I move to suspend all enforcement actions against the resident in question, pending a full review of the parking enforcement contract and the compliance procedures." All in favor? Every hand went up except Teresa's. "Motion carries," the board president said. "Meeting adjourned." People swarmed us as we packed up, some thanking me, some asking questions, and a few demanding copies of the documents. Teresa grabbed her flashlight and her windbreaker and walked out without a word, her bucket hat pulled low over her face. I watched her go, feeling a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. David clapped me on the shoulder. "You did good," he said. "This is not over yet, but you just won the big fight. The rest is cleanup." He was right. The next morning, I got a call from the management company. The woman on the line sounded nervous, apologizing for the delays and the confusion, and she said that my records request had been approved and that I would receive copies of all requested documents within 5 business days. She also said that the compliance findings against me were being withdrawn and that all fines were being waived. I did not thank her. I just said I would be reviewing the documents with my attorney and hung up. 2 days later, I got another call, this time from the owner of Rapid Response Tow and Recovery. He said he had reviewed the dashcam footage and the email thread, and he was terminating the contract with the HOA effective immediately. He also said he would be issuing a refund for any charges related to my vehicle, and that he was sorry for the inconvenience. A tow vendor refusing to act without proper authorization was the payoff I had been waiting for, and it felt like justice. The final domino fell the following week. The HOA issued a memo to all residents, clarifying the parking enforcement rules and announcing that the board was conducting a full audit of all vendor contracts. The memo also included a notice that Teresa Smith had resigned from the Finance Committee and would no longer be involved in compliance enforcement. The HOA issues a memo clarifying the rule Karen weaponized, and it turns out the old permit system was never officially replaced, which means every citation issued under the new rules was invalid. Teresa's group post got removed and replaced with a correction issued by the board president, apologizing for the confusion and the harassment. A few residents reached out to me privately, saying they had been targeted too, and asking if they could join a class action suit. David is working on that now. As for me, I am still living at the landing at Harborview, still parking in the same guest spot, and still driving past Teresa's townhouse every time I come home. She does not make eye contact anymore. She does not wave her flashlight or her clipboard. She just stays inside, and I am fine with that. I also got a lug wrench resting on the ground near the wheel as a reminder, a little souvenir from the day this whole mess started. I keep it in my trunk now next to the tire iron and the first aid kit, just in case I ever need it, but I do not think I will. The volunteer squad scene where Karen shows up with 2 helpers in vests and they fall apart under basic questions never happened, because Teresa lost her crew the moment the dashcam footage went public. Nobody wanted to be associated with her after that. The gatehouse chaos scene where the tow truck tries to enter and Karen blocks the lane like she is law enforcement did happen, sort of, but it was not at the gatehouse. It was at the community entrance lane where neighbors film as the tire clamp clicks shut, and Teresa tried to direct traffic like she had authority, waving her flashlight and yelling at cars to move. Someone called the police, and an officer showed up and told her to step back. She argued with him for 5 minutes before finally giving up and walking away. The whole thing was recorded by at least 3 people, and the videos are still circulating in the group chat. The funny karma moment came a week after the board meeting when Teresa tried to file a complaint against me for violating a noise ordinance. She claimed I was running power tools late at night, which was ridiculous because I do not own power tools and I work day shifts. She submitted her complaint in writing, citing a specific section of the HOA rules, and the board reviewed it. Turns out Karen confidently reads the wrong rule section out loud, and the section she cited was actually about commercial vehicle restrictions, not noise. The board sent her a polite email pointing out the mistake, and she never responded. The tow company ended up canceling the HOA contract entirely, refunding all charges related to my vehicle, and issuing a public apology. They also sent me a check for $300 as a goodwill gesture, which I did not expect but appreciated. I used the money to buy a dash cam for my own car, just in case Teresa or anyone else tries this again. David filed the fraud complaint with the Indiana Attorney General's office, and the investigation is ongoing. He also filed a formal harassment complaint with the State Real Estate Commission, targeting Teresa specifically for abuse of HOA authority. I do not know what will come of it, but I know it is on the record, and that feels like a win. The management company replaced the entire compliance team and hired a new vendor for parking enforcement, one with transparent pricing and no kickback clauses. The new vendor requires photographic evidence for every citation, and they have a formal appeals process that does not cost $100 to file. It is not perfect, but it is better. As for the red-stamped final notice envelopes, I still get them occasionally, but now they are just reminders about trash pickup schedules and community events. Teresa is not signing them anymore, and that makes all the difference. The community has settled down, mostly. People still gossip about what happened, and Teresa's name comes up in conversations, usually followed by some version of, "I always thought she was shady." A few residents have approached me to say they are glad I fought back, and a couple have asked for David's contact information because they are dealing with their own HOA issues. I give them his card and tell them to document everything. I still see the two neighbors who were whispering and pointing at the chalk marks by my tires. They nod at me now when we pass on the walking trail, and one of them stopped me last week to say he was sorry for not speaking up sooner. I told him it was fine, that I understood, and that what mattered was that the truth came out. The weather has been windy lately, the kind of wind that whips loose papers around and rattles chains, and every time I hear it, I think about that first day, standing in the parking lot with Teresa yelling and the tow truck idling behind her. It feels like a lifetime ago, but it has only been a few months. I learned a lot from this experience. I learned that HOAs can be corrupt, that some people will abuse power just because they can, and that the only way to fight back is with evidence and persistence. I also learned that most people are not like Teresa. Most people just want to live their lives, follow reasonable rules, and not get dragged into drama. The problem is that it only takes one person like Teresa to turn a neighborhood into a war zone, and if nobody stands up to them, they will keep doing it. I also learned that a good attorney is worth every penny. David did not charge me for the initial consultation, and he structured his fees so I could afford them without going broke. He also believed me when I told him what was happening, and that meant more than I can say. The dashcam footage was the key, the piece of evidence that made everything else credible. Without it, Teresa could have dismissed my complaints as exaggeration or retaliation, and the board probably would have backed her up. But once people saw the video, saw her moving the cones and staging the photos, there was no way to deny what she had done. It was proof, undeniable and permanent, and it destroyed her credibility. I still think about what would have happened if I had not recorded that first confrontation, if I had not called David, if I had just paid the fines and moved on. I probably would have ended up broke and bitter, and Teresa would have moved on to the next target. But I did not let that happen, and now she is the one dealing with consequences. The HOA held a special election last month to fill Teresa's vacant seat on the Finance Committee. I did not run, but I voted, and I made sure to talk to the candidates beforehand to ask them about transparency and accountability. The person who won is a retired accountant who promised to publish detailed budget reports every quarter and to eliminate all vendor contracts with kickback clauses. So far, she has kept her word. The neighborhood group chat is still active, but the tone has changed. People are more careful about what they post, more respectful, and less likely to pile on when someone makes a mistake. There is still drama, because there is always drama in a place like this, but it feels manageable now, like something we can handle without it turning into a war. I keep my lanyard with the gate fob and keys clipped to my belt loop whenever I am outside, a habit I picked up during the worst of the conflict. It is a small thing, but it makes me feel prepared, like I am ready for whatever comes next. I hope nothing comes next. I hope this is the end of the story, and that Teresa stays quiet, and the board keeps its promises, and the towing company never comes back. But if something does happen, I am ready. I have my dash cam, my attorney's number, and a filing cabinet full of evidence. I have witnesses who will back me up, and I have a reputation now as someone who will not roll over when things get bad. That is not a reputation I ever wanted, but it is the one I have, and I am going to use it to make sure this never happens to anyone else. Teresa still lives here, 3 streets over, in a townhouse with a purple door and a wilting potted plant on the porch. I see her sometimes, getting her mail or loading groceries into her car, and she never looks at me. I do not look at her either. There is nothing left to say. The final piece of the story came last week, when I got a letter from the HOA attorney. It was not a red-stamped final notice envelope this time, just a plain white business envelope with a return address label. Inside was a 1-page letter, formal and polite, confirming that all enforcement actions against me had been permanently suspended, that all fines had been waived, and that the HOA would not be pursuing any further complaints. The letter also included an apology, carefully worded and probably written by a lawyer, acknowledging that the parking enforcement procedures had been flawed and that the board was committed to ensuring fair treatment for all residents going forward. I read the letter twice, then folded it and put it in the filing cabinet with everything else. It felt like closure, or as close to closure as I was going to get. The HOA had backed down, the towing company had walked away, and Teresa had lost her power. I had won, and it felt good, but it also felt exhausting, like I had just finished running a marathon I never signed up for. David called me that afternoon to make sure I had received the letter. He sounded pleased, almost proud, and he said this was the best possible outcome short of a full settlement with cash damages. He also said that if the HOA violated the terms of the letter, we could reopen the case and pursue punitive damages, but he did not think that would happen. The board knows they are being watched now, he said. They are not going to risk another scandal. I hope he is right. I hope this is the end, and that I can go back to living a normal life without worrying about tow trucks and tire clamps and handheld plate scanners. I hope Teresa finds something else to occupy her time, something that does not involve harassing her neighbors. And I hope the next person who gets targeted by an HOA has the courage to fight back, because it is worth it, even when it is hard. I appreciate you hearing me out, and I will catch you next time.